Hello and welcome to episode 16 of the Developers Zen podcast, where we talk about everything in the games industry, but from the eyes of two indie devs. My name is Rainy, aka Siavash, and my co-host is Sydney, aka Fem. Today, on another topic of how to indie, we actually got our first guest, our incredible lawyer Ben. If you would like to say hi and introduce yourself, please go ahead.
Hey guys, I'm Ben Premack. I'm the managing partner and co-founder of Premack Rogers Downs PC, and I represent indie developers like these guys. And we've been working together for a couple of years now. It's been lots of fun.
And Rainy is very excited. He's been wanting a guest for a while.
Yeah, and look at this layout. Look at this layout we got going on. And this, by the way, this is experimental. We're recording everything in one go through Discord, so hopefully Discord gods are going to be kind to us, and things aren't going to go messy or disconnect or anything. So, but yeah, I am very excited because we've been having a lot of the How to Indie episodes every other week, and at least I reached a point where I was like, I don't have a lot to share anymore unless it's very technical stuff. So we should probably get some other people in here that can also share their experience. So yeah, that's why I'm really excited about this one.
And so, because I don't think you've
really
watched the podcast, if I remember, which is fine, no judgment. But just to catch you up, we've kind of been doing this series every other week where we talk about just kind of how to be an indie developer and the steps that you need to go through and kind of all the things that really you helped me figure out at the beginning, because I didn't, there's not a lot of resources out there, especially if you're new. You don't really know to go to the IGDA, to go to like the GDC stuff. If you're just now starting out, it's kind of like this big crazy open world of scariness. So we've kind of been putting together like, okay, what are the first steps? How do you even decide what game to make? And then once you do decide, like, where do you want to sell it? And how do you want to sell it? And what kind of funding do you need? And how to figure all those things out to kind of give people an idea of what steps to take. So one of the things that we mention a lot is we tell people to get a lawyer because it's been so important to us. And it's a thing that I think a lot of indie developers just kind of don't think about. Especially, the first step where I feel like you really need a lawyer is setting up the business. But there's so many resources out there, like LegalZoom, to just do it online, that I think a lot of people kind of skip the getting a lawyer at that stage, and they just go online and they set up their business, and then now they're already deep into the legal stuff without really having any advice. So we kind of wanted to talk about, like, we keep saying, okay, you hit this step, go get a lawyer. You should already have a lawyer if you've set up your business. So I kind of want to go over, like, how do you find a lawyer? Where are some places to look? I mean, obviously I would just tell everybody go to Ben, but you can't, cover everybody in the world. So, where can people look? What are some things to look out for a lawyer? And then, at what point does somebody like you need to kind of step in and help? What can they expect? So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I mean
definitely. And then also
find a lawyer.
Yeah.
And then also, I'd love to hear from y'all's perspective of the different things helped with, because some of the things that you were just talking about were issues that we we sat down years ago and talked through, and had to get fixed, like setting up the entity through LegalZoom, and going through and fixing all of that. And so love to talk with you about, kind of your experience of working with me and what I brought to the table.
Everything.
Yeah, and so
That's true.
So happy to share.
And we are very laid back around here too. So just so you know.
I do have a question. What is LegalZoom to begin with?
I guess it's more of an American thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I am like, I'm obviously I'm Iranian, but I've been living in the UK for the past few years, and I don't deal with a lot of legal stuff to begin with, so I don't even know what LegalZoom is. If you just say LegalZoom to me, I think it's like Zoom, but they're all lawyers.
Yeah, LegalZoom is this service that will help you with some basic legal things. But there is no, so they'll do things for you like help you set up your entity. But
Trademarking and stuff, I
there's
assume.
no.
Simple
Well,
things.
I don't know if they do trademarks.
So entity is
Yeah.
legal speak for your business.
Yes.
So not so much the trademarking and stuff, but the actual like getting your tax information set up. And
it's good
your
that I'm
ID
here
number
because I'm the
and all
dummy
that.
that has the stupidest
Yeah,
and
he's the
simplest
normal.
questions. I'm the normal. There you go. That's like, what was the channel that you like to watch? I'm the normal.
Sorted.
here. Sorted, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah. So they help you with some
Yeah,
basic legal.
so they'll help you with
things.
basic stuff, but you're never actually working with a person on the other end. They'll be like, we've got lawyers on staff who are here to consult if you need something.
And it's expensive.
Yeah.
It's so expensive.
They don't actually put a human being onto whatever they're doing for you. So it's entirely up to you as the consumer to self-inform, to go out and do the research, to be like, okay, what type of entity am I forming? And so, Sid set up an LLC with them, which ended up being the right type of entity, which was great.
Yeah.
But it was also something where, do you remember some of the issues that we ended up having early on that we needed to fix?
I'm just an insanely thorough person, so I don't make decisions without doing a lot of research first. I don't think I represent the average consumer. So the fact that we were fortunate enough that I set up an LLC, it's because I did the research to at least get close enough to see what was right. But I think in the end, I set up the wrong type of LLC. Like, I think I set up as like a sole proprietor, but it had to be something else. And so for tax reasons, we ended up having to change it. And then the main issue was that they lost my stuff. So I put it in, they said it was supposed to take a certain amount of time, and then it ended up taking like 3 or 4 months longer than that. And the only reason I got it was because I chased them down and said, hey, I was supposed to get this months ago. What's going on? And so they ended up expediting it. I think they still charged me the same amount, which pissed me off. And then I remember when I went to you to kind of like get it all transferred over, I think there was some kind of issue. It's been a while. I think there might have been an issue with, I'm trying to think. I don't know if there was
a
an
franchise tax issue.
Oh yeah, yeah. A lot of
Texas.
issues I've had were tax setup. Yeah, because
so that's kind of one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I said, which is as an indie dev, like, you guys can make games, you can go out, you can, think through all the different components that you need to get from concept to publishing.
Yeah.
And then there are kind of two professionals that you really, need to help. One of them's a tax professional, one of them's a legal professional. Because we're just dealing with the sort of, complicated things that you can't be expected to be an expert in.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of...
Unless you're making a game about lawyers, I guess.
It's a ton of intellectual property-related things, obviously, and then at the end of the day, a game's a product, and it's a product that can make tons and tons of money. And as soon as you make above a certain threshold, then you absolutely need to have yourself covered, otherwise you can get in a lot of trouble. But that's the thing about LegalZoom, by the way, quickly to say, is that it's weird to me because I see... I personally see most of the benefit in having a lawyer is really the consulting, because you go to the person, to your lawyer, with tons of questions that you don't even conceive how it could be solved or what even is the answer to, and then you sit down with them, you have a nice chat, you figure things out, every block goes into this place, and then you let them do their job. So for LegalZoom to leave that on to you, that's weird to me. It's like,
well, to be fair, I mean, to be totally fair...
I mean, we're not critiquing LegalZoom, by the way. Here. I'm just trying to understand what it is.
So for indie developers, because, like Ben said, our industry is so complicated, and like you said, we have the potential to make so much money and get taken advantage of very easily, then for that reason, having a lawyer just makes more sense. But for LegalZoom to operate as a business, think about, like, we have a person on our team who does like art shows. you know, she does like an art show a quarter and she sells her art and that's it. But in America, she still has to pay taxes on that. She still has to have a legal entity business, but it's not really worth it to pay a lawyer to set all that up when it's such a small little thing. Or if you look at, well, no, I would say probably voice actors probably need a lawyer too, because all the contracts they deal with. But it's for very small things, you know. If you're setting up a tiny, I don't know, like a food truck or something, just throw together an LLC. Like, it's not really, you know.
Well, that's the extent of my question about LegalZoom. We can continue with what you were going to mention. Would you
agree with that, Ben?
Yeah, like, you know, LegalZoom is great for simpler problems.
Yeah.
You know, stuff like you know, the restaurant that my wife and I went to last night for dinner. Like, they don't need a lawyer to help them set everything up. They need to be focusing their time and energy on making sure their burgers are the best in the town. Right. Like, and they were great. It was a great burger. But indie development, like you've been saying, you know, there's so many moving parts, there's so many complications, there's intellectual property, there are tax issues. There's also the issue that, you know, essentially the two of you came together and created the studio and then went out and hired a bunch of people to help you make the game. But fundamentally, it could have just been Rainy.
Yeah.
And Rainy could have all of a sudden made this game, published it not only in the UK, but throughout the EU, throughout the US, all around the world. And all of a sudden, you know, you could have been doing business in 193 countries or whatever it is right now. And that's just a huge, complicated thing that, you know, that's very unique to this industry, where you can go and publish and all of a sudden be doing business everywhere. Rather than just, you know, selling burgers in a town, you know, small town in
I mean, it's a
Western
young
Washington.
industry, it's a new one, but also, like you said, the accessibility of it in the recent years. And I mean, that's really why we are having a rise in indies, because anybody can really get on Steam and release a game and potentially be very successful and sell tons of it in all these countries with different laws and regulations and stuff. I mean, even the back end of Steam, when you're setting up your age rating, there are like 5 different organizations you need to go through for all of these different countries. So it's not something as small as it used to be.
The thing really to point out is that I think a lot of people kind of get wrong is I think a lot of people see lawyers as reactionary. You get a lawyer after you've gotten in trouble. That's when you need to start, but it needs to be a proactive thing. It's just like having a doctor. You don't just go to the doctor when you're sick. You go to get checkups, you go to get tests to make sure everything's functioning okay. It's preventative medicine. It's kind of how I see lawyers too. You're there to help us make sure we don't dig ourselves a hole that we can't get out of later. That's kind of the most important thing.
It's very easy to fall into as well in this industry.
Yeah, it really is. So let's say, you know, this is 4 years ago, and I'm a first-time indie developer, and I want to set up my business, and I've gotten good advice to not go to LegalZoom, and I need to find a lawyer. Where do I look?
I'm in tons of different places. So, you know, talk to other indie devs. That's always a big thing. You know, if they've had a good experience or a bad experience with a lawyer, they're going to tell you. And there are enough other indie devs out there who do go to lawyers that, you know, someone's going to be able to point you towards someone. There are, if you don't know other indie developers, you know, you were talking about IGDA earlier. That's the International Game Developers Association. You know, there's Discord channels. There are professional listings where you can go in and see, okay, you know, who actually does this sort of stuff. You can also just do a basic Google search for something like video game lawyer or indie developer lawyer, and you'll come up with names like mine, or the other lawyers in the United States who help with indie devs. A lot of it's word of mouth, you know, just talking with people about who they've had good experience with, because there are not many of us out there. You know, there are probably at this point 25 or 30 lawyers in the whole United States who focus on indie developers.
You know, that's
helping you guys to build stuff.
Is it worth it, you think, to go to somebody who specializes in video games, or could I just go to like a contract lawyer, or would any lawyer do? Because I think a lot of people don't even know the difference between what lawyers specialize in. If you say, oh, my lawyer, people think you have a defense attorney on standby. They don't really, So could I just go to anybody, or should I be looking for a specific video game professional?
It's kind of like the conversation we were just having about Indie Zoom. Or sorry, no, about LegalZoom. Where, the more specialized you get, the more you can find someone who can help you with your particular issues, the more likely it is that it's going to be successful. And, for me, like when we first met and we're going through, you didn't have to explain to me, okay, this is a publishing agreement, this is how the different components work, this is how a video game gets built, these are the different intellectual property issues that come together. And so you got to benefit knowing that I came in with a bunch of background knowledge, knowing that how law actually fits into the video game industry, where a business, a transactional, software lawyer might be able to come in and help you put together the contract. They're probably perfectly, they're perfectly competent. They know what they're doing, but they don't necessarily have the background to look at it and go like, okay, these are the points that I'm looking for in a publishing agreement. Or, if I'm doing a porting agreement, here's what I need to be looking for.
The components
or
that
this
go
is
into
a
an indie process.
Yeah.
Really,
Yeah, ask me how easy it was to find an accountant who knew anything about video games.
Oh god.
And tax laws. It was almost impossible. I wasn't able to find a good tax person until you sent me somebody. But nobody understood how it worked. Trying to explain that, we get funding from a publisher, but it's not actually income. It's money that we then have to spend on bills. How do we classify that, and when do we start considering it income? And it took forever to find somebody who actually understood what was going on.
I don't know the specifics of it, but it almost feels like the laws are a little bit outdated in this front. That it doesn't really...
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. The tax law just got updated, but it's still outdated.
Yeah, and I mean, that's United
and
States.
And it just got updated in a way that's worse.
That's worse, yeah.
Oh my god. And that's just United States. You don't know how Europe is reacting to this. I know some countries are doing it better than others, like the Norse countries, like Netherlands and Germany, Germany doesn't really, it's not really Norse, but the North Europe is doing pretty good when it comes to video games, because there's just so many grants and so many subsidies and stuff that you can get when you're making games. What? Sweden?
The one next to Sweden?
Netherlands, Finland, Sweden, Norway.
Is it Norway that's got? I think it's Norway that has all of the.
Poland
has a lot of the business right now, right? Forget it.
I don't know.
Ignore me. I'm being crazy.
But
anyway,
what I was gonna say about lawyers is that that must make it a bit easier for people to find good lawyers if there's less of you guys. And the reason I'm saying that is because at some point I had to look for a lawyer here in the UK. My case was a lot more general. Wasn't really video game related, but I found tons and tons of lawyers, and I didn't even half of them didn't even look legit. Does that make sense? There was this website that I went to, and you had to put in a request, and then you would get emails back from potential lawyers that can look at your case for you. And then I got tons of, and I had to call them, and a lot of them that I called didn't even seem professional. So it's almost like, I don't know, yellow lawyers or gray lawyers, but they're not really lawyers, but they're just like a little consultancy agency that they're trying to sort things out for
that
you.
Actually kind of goes into my next question, which is how do you determine who a good lawyer is? And Ben, you were saying, networking, word of mouth, all that stuff. But I think the thing that also stops a lot of people from approaching a lawyer is the fear of the cost. Because anytime you see anything in movies where lawyers come up, it's always like a rich person who has a lawyer on retainer.
And to a normal person, lawyer sounds like, a lot of money.
Oh, money, yeah. So I guess my next question is, is it common for lawyers to do free consults, or can we at least get into a meeting with somebody to do I even need a lawyer, or are you the right person for me? What's the barrier of entry, I guess, for even approaching a lawyer?
Yeah, free consults are usually the norm of, sitting down, talking with someone. Typically, by the time someone finds me, they know that I'm the right lawyer for them. So we're not so much having an initial consult to figure out like, can I handle your case? It's more, all right, give me the details and let's start talking through this. But yeah, it's always a free consult to sit down and talk with them. There's certain other lawyers who do charge for the consult, but what they're doing is they are their work, how do I put this? Generally, when you're meeting with me for a consult, we're meeting together to figure out, like, okay, does your case apply to what I do? Can I actually help you? A lot of lawyers who charge for consults are looking at more where the initial consult is actually advising, sitting down, and you're going to spend the first 5 minutes figuring something out, and then the next hour of the consult is going to be actually talking through your issue.
Makes sense.
And sorting out the problem. And so, it's a difference of, okay, are you paying to meet with them and get their expertise, or are you paying to meet with them and figure out if they can actually help you?
Got it. Okay.
Yeah,
that does make sense.
So we talked about, like, setting up your business is something that indie developers definitely need help with, because I wouldn't say it's a complicated process. It is a bit of a headache if you don't really know what you're navigating. I would imagine most indie developers are going to set up as an LLC if they're in the United States. Again, most of the stuff's United States centric, so I apologize to non-Americans. But yeah, what is an LLC?
Do you want me to answer, or do you want to, Sid?
Sure, I'll answer. So, it's a limited liability corporation. So there's different types of incorporating when you create your business. So you have, and all of those come with different liability amounts. And the liability is like, who's responsible if shit hits the fan, essentially. So limited liability is usually if you have a small number of people who are running the business, usually 1 or 2 or 3, and it's to kind of, this is where it gets a little fuzzy for me, because I know there's limited liability, I know there's a middle one, and then there's like the actual incorporation.
Yeah,
and the incorporation, it's been a while
Yeah.
since I went through school, so it's a little fuzzy for me.
No worries.
Because I took, and all my stuff's like hospitality industry stuff.
Deals are mostly
so you're totally right. You did use the wrong word, and I'm sorry for correcting you, but it is a limited liability company.
Not
a
corporation. Incorporation is when you get to the later stages. Yeah.
Corporation sounds cooler, to be fair.
It does. And so there are a bunch of different types of entities that you could choose. And what you said about limited liability is exactly, one of the reasons why you form an entity. And the whole idea is that you've got this entity that's responsible for all of its liabilities, that it owns its own intellectual property, it owns its own assets, and it's responsible, and it has all of its own separate liabilities. And then you've got your own personal assets, your own personal liabilities. You've got your car payment, you've got your house, whatever it is. Exactly. And they're separate. So if something goes wrong with the business, then having a limited liability business of some sort makes it so that
they can't come after my house.
Exactly. And so it's important to set it up because it protects you as a person.
So within games, it's probably not as much liability. One of the things that we're kind of shown us, because I went through culinary school, for those who don't know. So when we were taught about the differences, it was like, okay, if you're running a restaurant and somebody gets sick off of eating your food and they sue you, well, who's responsible?
Not you.
They're suing the company, not you personally. It gets a little shady in food because they can sue you personally because you made the decision, and then it's a whole other complicated
I'm gonna
thing.
lead us,
but the gist of it is that.
I'm going to lead us into the next category of companies or corporations with a question, actually. So if LLCs are like this, then why would anybody wants to make a different type of entity?
So when it comes down to it, there are like a dozen different types of entities that you can create. Everything from like co-op to a nonprofit organization to a corporation to an LLC. In my daily practice, I tend to deal with 3 types of entities, and that's it. Limited liability companies, LLCs, S corporations, and C corporations. Anything else than
Those are
that
the ones
is
I
just
forgot.
Sounds like something out of Resident Evil.
doesn't
G corporation.
doesn't apply to these issues. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, the corporation will protect you from zombies.
Yes, it's Umbrella.
And the likelihood that anybody starting out for the first time is going to go straight into an S or a C corp is probably kind of unlikely.
Mm.
Right? You'll probably start out as an LLC and then usually you grow.
But like,
into
I'm
the other
wondering,
ones.
why isn't, this is gonna be a crazy question, but it's a funny one. Why isn't Amazon an LLC? So that Jeff Bezos can be comfortable that
Too
his
much
assets
liability.
are safe. So you can't make it an LLC based on its size?
The corporations also limit liability as well. It's not just the limited. Yeah. So once you start incorporating and you start combining businesses and it starts getting really complex, you are kind of forced into that.
Yeah, because like,
corporation
again,
bracket.
Amazon example, they have Audible, they have Amazon Video, they
Yeah.
have Amazon Music, and this whole part of the umbrella of Amazon. So at
Yeah.
that point,
So
you just
if
can't even-
correct me if I'm wrong, but if we're talking about Jeff Bezos, he still has the protection that you'd get from a limited liability, but it's a different type of protection for bigger situations.
So we call it a liability shield.
There you go.
And any of those 3 types of entities have a liability shield.
Mm. That's a cool name for it too. Liability shield. I like that.
And so one of the big things about also actually having a liability shield, let's say you go through all this trouble to set up an LLC. And one of the reasons why you do so is because you want to make sure that your personal assets are protected from the business. There are things that you need to do, and this is another reason to hire a lawyer. There are things that you need to do to actually make sure that your LLC is treated as a different legal entity from you, because just going through the entity formation process isn't enough. You actually need to be treating that entity as a separate legal being from you, with separate bank accounts, separate books.
You should
separate,
actually follow through with the
separate
instructions, so to speak, of how to run it. Yeah.
Yeah, which is
Exactly.
why the first advice that I kind of gave to anybody who wants to have an indie company, make indie games, sell indie games, the second you start selling it, it's a business. It goes from something you do as a hobby to now it's a business. And the absolute moment you start selling it, you need a new bank account. It's just not worth it to get the two mixed up. So that was usually kind of you need a bank account. You have to keep everything separate because you want to limit that liability as much as you can.
So
whereas if you spend a period of time where they're integrated, it's a mess.
So following on that, approaching a lawyer can be obviously scary for many reasons, money being one of them. But one of the reasons that I think some people might not want to approach a lawyer is worrying about confidentiality, right? So I always had this question, and I don't know if I ever Googled it, but I think it's best to just ask you. If somebody comes to a lawyer and they discuss, like, let's say it's the consultation, everything from that, I assume, is confidential between you two. Let's say somebody did some shady tax stuff that they didn't intend to do, and they're worried that if they go to a lawyer, the lawyer's just going to hand them to police. Or in another way, they have some really unique idea, and they're worried that they're going to go to the lawyer, and the lawyer is going to sell their idea to somebody else. So how does the confidentiality work when somebody approaches a lawyer and sit down for that consultation?
Yeah, so it's even more than confidentiality. There's actually something called the attorney-client privilege, where your lawyer is supposed to be someone who you can speak to completely honestly, and say, and admit if you did something wrong. And then the lawyer's supposed to be able to help you to figure out how to deal with that issue. So, like, if it turns out that you committed a crime, and even if you admitted that crime to your lawyer cannot be called in a court to testify against you. There's privilege there that the lawyer would have to, essentially tell the judge, I cannot be called to do this. It was told to me in confidence, and you cannot be forced. Like, if I was subpoenaed to come in and testify for something, I cannot be forced to do so. And so there's confidentiality, like, I'm not going to go and turn around and talk about your problems with someone else. That's not only am not only am I legally and ethically barred from doing that, I'm just also not going to do it. But then also there are additional layers on top of that to actually make it so that you can be completely honest with your lawyer. Talk about what you're trying to do. Talk about all the issues that you've run into. Talk about the positives. Talk about the negatives. Talk about the mistakes that you might have made, and go through and try to figure out how to solve everything.
If there's
honestly,
one person
this
you
really-
should trust, it should be your lawyer.
Yeah, it just seems like there is no reason. Like, if there's one person, right, like you said, it should be your lawyer to just go ahead and. So there you go. That's even one less, I guess, mental barrier to want to approach a lawyer in the first place.
So, okay, so we've found our lawyer, we've had our consultation, we're happy. At that point, you usually end up signing a contract with your lawyer, right? Of like, hey, this is the money that's gonna be exchanged, and I represent you and all that good stuff. So let's say I am an indie company or indie developer, and I, am thinking about signing with this publisher, and you also happen to represent the publisher. What happens then?
So at that point, I would say, hey, I'm so sorry. There's a conflict of interest here. I can't represent you in this. Especially if I, like, let's say I represent that publisher in something completely different. Like I help them with their, internal employment issues. I might be able to look at it and say there's no conflict of interest between here. We can waive this. I can help with this publishing deal and get it sorted out. But usually I'll look at it and be like, no, I am compromised because I've worked with this publisher for years. I know them. I know the way that their business works. I know their motivations in negotiations and stuff like that. And so they've shared confidential information with me, tying it back to the earlier topic. And so I would look at it and be like, I'm really sorry, I can't help you. But let me refer you over to this guy who can. And so, we're going to look at each situation like that and figure out, all right, is this a waivable or a non-waivable conflict of interest? And then if it is waivable, to what extent? If it isn't waivable, who can I help point you toward who can actually help you with this?
It seems like it's like the extent of your knowledge that would bar you from being able to waive it or not in terms of the conflict, yeah.
And who
and the extent of my involvement. Yeah. And the extent of like, I'll also look at it and be like, this isn't part of the rules of professional conduct. These are actually, the rules of professional conduct are the rules that govern how lawyers actually operate. If you're ever interested in going out and being very bored, I recommend reading them. But I'll also look at it, and sometimes it might be something where strictly reading the rules, I could represent both sides. Like there's no conflict between them. It's something where I'm just helping negotiate the terms. But I might have a really close personal connection with one of my clients. And look at it and be like, no, I cannot waive this because I really care about this person and I just met you. I can't be impartial. So I need to go into something knowing that I could be impartial.
That's good. So let's say, since I kind of brought up contracts, I feel like contracts are probably the most important thing that gets handled by a lawyer. And I kind of want to talk about like what the different types of contracts are. I know just in the time that I've worked with you, we've handled publishing contracts, contract work, we've handled music contracts, we've handled licensing agreements. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into, and that's just for one video game. So what are kind of the most common ones that come up that you deal with? And I kind of want to talk about like what are things that people should look out for, especially what you'd need a lawyer to take a look at for certain things.
I also think it's a good idea. You can either start with this one or end it with it, but I feel like the more inexperienced people might be asking, okay, so why a contract? Why not employment?
Oh, contract versus hiring an employee.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. That's
Hmm.
yeah.
Because
That's
some
a
people
very
don't understand what hiring
What the
means and how
difference
what
is,
goes into
yeah.
it and how difficult of a task it actually is.
yeah. That's true. So
Yeah,
I would
definitely.
say let's do that first. Then we'll talk about contractors versus employees, and because
And then the
that's
different types of contracts.
making your game in the first place, and then we can kind of get into all the other stuff. Because I think that is one of the first things that you handled for me was the contract we had for our contractors. I think we did that first.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. And I had, so when we started, Rainy was lucky in that I at least knew that we needed contracts with all of our people. When I got started, he was just tossing money at people to give him stuff. And then I kind of came in and I was like, well, wait a second.
You'd be surprised how
figure out-
many indies do that.
It's very common, yeah. And I mean, you can do it. But like I said, the whole point of having a lawyer is preventative, not reactionary.
Yeah.
So the point of having a lawyer take care of a contract or having a contract with the people that you're asking to make things for you isn't so much that you absolutely have to have it. It's that you want to have it in case something bad happens and you have a document that you can fall back on of like, what's the standard operating procedure for how to do things if something bad happens. And you have kind of a rule book basically. So I had a contract that I had put together that was arguably awful, but it was better than nothing. That it was just kind of a template that I'd thrown together, and it was basically, you guys agree to do this, we agree to give you this in exchange, and we own stuff. And that was kind of basically it. I think it was like a page and a half. And then now our contract is like 4 pages with our contract workers, because there's stuff in there that I hadn't considered. And, and I'm lucky that you have a really great template that we were able to kind of go with. But that I still was able to make changes to. And that's something that I think is important. That I think a lot of people don't realize when it comes to contracts is a contract can be whatever you need it to be, as long as both parties agree to it. So if there's some kind of thing that's important to me, I can make sure it gets put into the contract. So I know the thing that I added was for our artists. I wanted them to have the ability to sell their art from our game at conventions or whatever means they felt appropriate to make money for themselves. Because I don't think that's something that goes into contracts for artists, and I thought it was important. So is that a common thing that people add stuff, or do people just trust you and go, it's a contract, whatever?
Oh no, every single person that I work with there's some degree of customization where we're sitting down and going, all right, how does this work for you? How do you want your business to operate? How do you want your relationship to look with your contractors? Then there are the basic things like, so Rainy, you were talking about employment versus contracting.
Yeah.
So, again, this is all US centric, but UK laws are very similar, which is, if someone is an employee of the company, any work that they make for the company is assumed to be owned by the company.
Yeah.
It's called work for hire. When someone is a contractor, just getting brought in to do a particular piece of work, the way that the law is set up is unless there is a piece of paper stating that the work that they are creating on behalf of the company belongs to the company, the law assumes that they retain ownership of it. And so, a huge component of what I deal with on a daily basis is helping to do that sort of preventative work of looking at, all right, how are we parsing the intellectual property here? Who's creating what, and how do we make sure that it ends up being in the right ownership bucket? So that if this game is successful, which we're all hoping for, that you guys aren't going to have someone coming and knocking down your door and claiming copyright co-ownership, or something of that sort, where there could be, or that they own the copyright and license it to you, or something of that sort. Because that could end up being immensely expensive to sort out down the line. There are great cases out there looking at where there wasn't a contract in place. Just recently, there was a dispute between Bungie and their original composer, where they didn't have a contract in place.
Same with Doom, actually.
Yeah. And it comes up all the time where there's a dispute about, okay, who actually owns this? And so it needs to be down in the paperwork about who actually owns it.
Why is it more expensive?
And yeah, that was one.
When you have to
What was that?
Why is it more expensive when you have to patch it up afterwards
Because
rather
litigation is expensive.
Right.
Because now I'm paying for the lawyer's time.
What is litigation?
So litigation is basically when you go to court. And now the arguments have begun.
So rather than it
you
being
need the
something
lawyer
to set up with your lawyer, it's at that point it's a court case.
Pretty much, yeah.
A dispute between two people.
Yeah.
Who owns
No, it doesn't mean it's gonna end up in front of a jury and people are, lawyers are gonna argue and stuff. Most stuff is handled outside of the courtroom.
Yeah.
Let's say we handled it right. Let's say we got the intellectual property all sorted out in the very beginning, preventative maintenance, like Sydney was talking about, and you know that you own that IP. Then you might have spent a couple $1,000 on making sure those contracts are in place properly, having the lawyer's advice to make sure that everything's sorted out. And that's a lot of money, but it's also, you know that intellectual property is yours. If you're coming back in later and trying to sort it out after the game has made money, then the only reason why that dispute is happening is because there is some sort of question about who actually owns the intellectual property. I, as a lawyer, have an obligation to make sure that if I bring a case for something, that it actually has a valid legal grounds. I just can't come in and say, hey, I'm going to fight you with this because I want to fight with you about it. So all of a sudden, then you're in a position where there is actually a dispute about who owns that intellectual property. And if it's looking like that dispute is coming down on the individual's side rather than on the business's side, then you're needing to settle things with them, where you're looking at it and saying, okay, well, if you were to own this intellectual property, this could be worth $1 million, $10 million, $100 million. Whereas if I own it, then it's worth whatever to you, it's worth whatever I paid you in the beginning. To me, it's worth saving all of that money. And so at that point, then, you're going through and you're settling a dispute and actually paying them for the value of their rights rather than for something where that there is value because you wouldn't be fighting about it if there wasn't. Whereas in the beginning, getting something sorted out.
Yeah.
Actually, a
and
great
there's no
example of
value
this.
created either because there's nothing to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A great example of this is actually what just happened with Disney and the Beauty and the Beast movie. I imagine you're familiar with this one, Ben.
I didn't hear about that one.
Oh, so
I'm also unfamiliar, so
let
give
me.
us a little...
So,
Yeah.
The motion capture technology that Disney used to make Beauty and the Beast and a couple other movies, they found that they basically lost track of who owned the IP. So when Disney purchased the technology, they purchased it from a company who actually didn't own it.
Ooh,
And it's been a legal mess for quite a while now. So the original owners sued Disney for the profits that they made as a result of the technology being used in Beauty and the Beast and a couple other movies. So had Disney done better due diligence and tracked down the ownership of the IP and made sure it was them, it would have just cost them whatever it costs to secure the IP. But now what they're having to pay out is royalties, essentially, from using the technology. And the royalties are based off of how much money the movie made. So rather than losing out on
popular movies that's been made in the last 30 years.
So, and I think it was some of the Marvel movies too had used the technology as well. So
Wow.
rather than spending
It's exponentially
possibly
gets worse.
Yeah, they could have spent tens of thousands of dollars in the beginning, but now they're paying out millions.
Yeah. And if you think about
Are you familiar with what's going on with CRISPR? Sorry, Rainy, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, if you think about it from a mathematical point of view as well, when you try to prevent it, it's more like a constant, price or amount of money that it would be, rather than a multiplication of however much it is. It's a percentage at that point. It can still, I know in details it can still be, but it seems like in most cases,
just going to say,
it's like a percentage rather than just pay
how much
fix the contract.
I like a good metaphor.
Yeah.
Right? So if we take it back to medical stuff, it's the difference between paying your doctor, $100 a month to get a checkup and make sure you're okay, and catching something before it gets bad, say cancer,
Yeah.
and then having to pay later for, let's say you don't do all that preventative stuff, you find out about the cancer once it's too late, and now you're paying tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to take care of it. If you'd caught it earlier and prevented it, it wouldn't have been so detrimental than if you caught it later and now it's wreaking havoc. So it's kind of the same idea.
Sorry, Ben. What
I like
to-
metaphors.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna throw out another
CRISPR.
example, which is what's going on with CRISPR, and one of the reasons why it hasn't been picked up commercially and why there hasn't been a whole bunch of development of gene therapies is because there's been an argument about who actually owns that intellectual property, and who owns CRISPR as a technology. And so it's been, as far as I'm concerned, detrimental to all of humanity that they're fighting
It
over this
is.
IP. But if they'd sorted it out ahead of time, and made sure that all the paperwork was in place and thought through these issues, then it would have been better for everyone.
And I wouldn't even I think that it's probably very possible for people on the outside, for gamers, for whatever, to look at this and go, well, this is just greedy people arguing over who gets paid. I think it's really easy to just be like, well, who cares? Just make the stuff and just, well, whatever happens, happens. But you also have to think about it from the perspective of people deserve to be paid for the work that they do and the art that they create. And so, it happens a lot. It happened a lot in video games a long time ago, and it's, I think, thankfully getting better. But there are a lot of video games that were made in the 80s and 90s that aren't owned by the people who made them.
Oh yeah.
They're owned by the
Especially
people who
Japanese
published
games.
them.
If you look at them.
Yeah, and
It's-
so if
it's
you
really-
want more out of the IP at a later date, it comes down to the decision of the publisher rather than the artists themselves who actually made it.
I mean, it's
So
like us
that's
wanting
why-
another Mass Effect game. It's not going to happen because
It's not gonna
BioWare is
happen.
BioWare, but it's not the same people. They all left and are in
Yeah.
different companies.
Yeah, and that's kind of a thing with video games, is when it's owned by people who didn't make it. Yeah, you might get a fourth Mass Effect game, but it's not going to be anything like the first three. Ask us how we know. So,
Don't talk about
we're
drama.
Mass Effect people. Yeah. So, so yeah, I think, and this kind of goes into back to contracts and stuff. So we talked a little bit about contractors. Let's say we're now looking at a publishing contract. It's, I feel like, becoming more and more common for publishers to ask for IP rights. Do you think, what are some things I think we talked in our last podcast, what are some red flags to look out for in a publishing agreement? And we went over a whole bunch of things that we thought were red flags, but is there anything that you as a lawyer look out for that you would tell your client, hey, maybe you need to think about this and make sure you're actually okay with this, and here's what this actually is going to mean. Here's the definition of this fine print.
Yeah, so they're always kind of, whenever I'm looking at a contract, I'm looking at it with two different minds. One of them is I'm looking at the legal side and being like, all right, how is this parsing out the legal obligations on both ends that are actually enforceable? And then I'm also looking at it from a business perspective. And so, often when I look at a publishing agreement, what I'll do is, then sit down and have a conversation with the client where I'm like, okay, this is what this says from a business side. You're going to get this much money. The royalty split's going to be this. You're going to get this much up front. Then they're going to support, additional 3 DLCs down the line. They're going to pay you this much. Here are the triggers for what actually gets you paid. Here's what you've actually agreed to deliver. And so we'll talk through those business points and be like, all right, is this what you actually talked about with the developer? Or with the publisher, and made sure that you're on the same page as them. And then I'll look at it from a legal perspective and make sure that there aren't pitfalls in there.
Loopholes, yeah.
They're going to come on, that are going to come in and cause problems, like ways that the publisher could not pay you for a delivered milestone. Going through and making sure that's all there. Looking at intellectual property and saying, all right. If you're giving up your intellectual property, are you doing so knowing what you're giving up? because let's just talk through it.
So I think a
one of
lot
the
of
other
indie
issues-
developers
yeah.
don't know what they're giving up. When I think it's common for publishers to just kind of put it in there, thinking that nobody's going to notice or say anything, and then and then indie developers like, oh yeah, IP, whatever, and then they just sign it without really thinking.
You
about
also
it.
get
But
lost in the hype of it as well. Oh, this big company.
Yeah, it's very
wants me,
exciting,
and then
yeah.
you just kind of
just sign on the
exciting.
line. We'll figure it out later. But how important is it for a developer? I mean, any contract you sign on either side, but to actually look at it and really consider every single paragraph and what the repercussions of that is going to be.
I mean, I've been doing this for more than a decade, and when I'm reading through a new contract that I haven't seen before, I judge my time that I'm going to get through something like 3 to 4 pages an hour. Where my normal reading speed, like if I'm just sitting down and reading a novel, like I just tear through it.
Yeah.
But I'm reading it word for word. I am looking at how are the commas put in there? How are these sentences constructed? Where are the pronouns? And is it clear what these pronouns are referring to? And, it's not just reading it and going, okay, I think I understand what this is saying. It's catching everywhere where there's potential ambiguities, because those are the ambiguities you're end up fighting about. Like I've got a new associate who I'm training right now on reading contracts, and I sent them over a paragraph of text, and I went, okay, I see 11 ambiguities in here, things that if I wanted to fight someone about, I could fight them about these points. How many do you see? And they saw like 4. And so it turned into a great educational opportunity for me to be like, hey, this person is an experienced, or they've gone through law school, they've passed the bar, they know what they're doing. They just don't have the experience to read through all of this paperwork and see what it looks like. And so if you think about someone who's gone through and done all of that professional development, and then compare and contrast that to someone who's indie dev who hasn't had any of that training, we're going to be seeing things that you guys don't see, and helping to fix issues that are in there, ahead of time.
Especially that pronoun thing you said is very interesting, because a lot of times, in language, you don't know what the it at the second paragraph is referring to, or who's them or who's theirs. At some point, I've seen that, especially.
How often do you and I have miscommunication errds?
Yeah, it's like, oh, I'm referring to this, not that. Yeah.
Happens all the time.
Reading through a contract, like if you read through my prose and what I write in a contract, I almost never use pronouns. It just
invites confusion.
Because they're a point for ambiguity. Exactly. Yep.
And there's also an importance too that I kind of knew about, but I didn't really realize how important it was to create definitions within the contract.
Oh,
so
right.
sometimes when you look at a contract, you'll see at the beginning, usually the most common one is like, who are the developers, who are the publishers, and when we use those words, what is it referring to? But there are more complicated ones, like what are royalties? What are, how do you define all of these terms? And if those terms aren't defined in the contract, again, it leaves room for ambiguity. So I think that's kind of another thing too that people don't really think about.
Yeah, and I think that also, we've been talking a lot about how things can go wrong. Ways that I can help things go right is, like we were talking about the difference between work for hire and not work for hire, and people getting paid for their labor. And I know solutions that people have come with, that I've come up with, or that other lawyers or other business people have come up with over the years to pay for those rights in the long run, so that the original creator is getting some benefit. You look at the movie industry and you think about, all right, they talk about points, and someone's, getting a half a point. So that means they're getting, 0.5% of, gross revenue, or, however they've defined the contract, over the term, over the life of the movie or whatever it is. And taking and applying that same sort of idea to a video game contract, where you can look at it and be like, all right, well, I'm only going to pay you your contractor, your hourly rate right now for your work. But if this thing is successful, I want you to share in the success.
Hmm.
And so there are ways to go about it that are also respectful to both sides, where you're saying, I'm not looking to take your IP and not pay you. I'm looking to make sure that I own the intellectual property, that we've got everything sorted out, so we're not going to end up in a dispute, and you're going to make your money in the long run. And ways to construct that make it a lot more fair to both sides.
One of the interesting things that I had seen in the contract that we had put together, I had considered, was what happens to the game or the rights to the game if the publisher changes ownership, which I think is a very important topic right now with what's happening in the industry. So can you talk a little bit about that and like how that kind of stuff can be important?
Yeah, well, I mean, you go and you work with a publisher and, you might have a great rapport with someone, but, well, they could sell the business, or that person could leave, and then get replaced with someone else. And so, there's certain things that we can do to guarantee that, X person is going to be working on your contract for the length of it. But what's a lot more important is looking at it and going, all right, well, even if this person isn't necessarily there throughout the continuity, throughout the entire thing, let's at least make sure that we've got continuity of who we're doing business with. Because the worst thing could be if you end up with, all of a sudden, like, the publisher is acquired by another company that has completely different priorities.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then, you're stuck in a position where, you've got a signed contract, it's valid, it's enforceable, but you're dealing with things that you never thought you'd have to deal with. And so going through and being like, all right, that's another component of this contract that we need to be looking at.
Yeah.
I think too, back to kind of the initial question I had was like, let's say I go to a publisher and let's say they have a contract that they use for all of their publishing agreements. And I bring that contract to you and say, hey, let's look over this. What are some things you're looking out for that maybe developers could try to look out for too, as like, oh, this is a thing I really definitely need a lawyer if I don't have one already. So things like IP ownership, or I remember there was because we had looked at a lot of different publishers with you before we signed on with the one that we did. So you and I looked at a lot of contracts together. And I know there were a couple that you looked at and you were like, oh God. So what makes you do that? Like, oh God, I need to rewrite this whole thing.
Yeah. So one thing that'll make me look at it and go, oh God, I just have to rewrite this, is if it's just not understandable. If I'm sitting down and I'm reading it through it, and going, I don't know what this is saying, then, it might make sense from like plain language perspective, but from a legal language perspective of like, if I put this in front of a judge and try to make sure that I am convincing that judge that my interpretation is the correct one, then, it needs to be constructed in a certain way to be unambiguous. So I'm looking at that sort of stuff. Particular questions are anything from like, all right, how is the game defined? What are you obligated to deliver? What if you... Yeah, exactly. What if you were to deliver your gold master and then the publisher just sits on it? What if it says that, you're late in delivery and that transfers intellectual property over to them, and then all of a sudden they're able to go out and hire a third-party developer and essentially take this entire thing away from you without paying you anything more for it.
Is that something you actually see in contracts?
Oh yeah.
Holy crap.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, if the developer just gives up, I guess.
Or, I mean, let's say, you got sick, Rainy, for a month. You miss your milestone delivery and...
That would have been it.
That's it.
Game gone, yeah.
Yep.
3 years out the
looking
window.
at stuff like that.
That's why you need a lawyer, because you
looking
need to
at
cover both sides.
Yeah.
Yeah, what else? Let's see. I mean, I've got a whole list of things that I go through. I look at the length of the term of the contract. So, how many years is it going to be around? A lot of publishers want, an undefined term because they want to make as much money off of the game as they possibly can. That's actually unenforceable in a court of law. A judge would look at that and
Interesting.
attribute a reasonable amount of time to it. And so, I also know that just based on the way the industry works, a 7 to 9 year license is typical. Anything more than that is you're tying up your IP for a really long time. I'm looking at options. I'm looking at term. I'm looking at territory. I'm looking at what are the different ways. Yeah. Is this publisher actually, they want a worldwide right to publish. Do they actually have the capacity to publish worldwide?
Yeah.
And do they have, is this from like a practical perspective? Can they actually do this? And also, if I give a publisher rights to publish my game in China, but they're not able to publish them there, and I've given them an exclusive right, then all of a sudden I want to work with another publisher who can actually publish in China or might know the Chinese or Southeast Asian market better than the publisher that I've decided to work with. Then, I'm stuck with the original guys who can't actually do it. Or you're looking at merchandising rights, you're looking at derivative rights, you're looking at options, you're looking at, a lot of times they'll want like a right of first refusal to come in and make a bid on your next game. And how does that tie your hands? Isn't necessarily a bad thing. But it is something that I want to make sure that my clients understand of, okay, if the publisher is demanding a right of first refusal, what does that mean about your ability to go and talk with other publishers in the future, especially if your game is successful, and to get better terms down the line if you're stuck talking with these guys first?
Can you explain right of first refusal? Because I don't think, I know what it means, but I don't think a lot of people are going to know what that means.
Yeah, so right of first refusal is essentially you have to go to that publisher first before you can talk with anyone else.
Does that include you? Like if you want to self-publish?
No,
Okay.
You could self-publish. Yeah.
Okay.
And then there are a whole bunch of different rights, and it might, in the header of the contract, it might say right of first refusal, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the wording of that paragraph is actually a right of first refusal. There are a lot of other types of rights that I'm looking for, like, is it a right of last offer? Is it a right of last match? Is it a right of first offer? People will call it a right of first refusal, but it might not actually be that. And so, looking at it and going, all right, well, what does this actually say, and how do I translate this for my clients so that they understand it? Because like a right of last match can be a really, really difficult thing to deal with. Because let's say you're working with a public. Yeah, I don't think it's ever something that's come up with you. But it's where, you go out and you find a publisher that you really want to work with, but you've given a right of last match to someone else. Well, then you have to turn around and tell publisher that you really want to work with, before I can sign anything with you, I have to go talk with this other person, disclose all of the material terms of the contract. How much are you paying for? What's the game? What's the intellectual property? Essentially show them everything in your soft underbelly, and give them the opportunity to make the same deal or a better one.
Right. Oh, wow.
Yep.
Exactly. And so a lot of publishers want that because, it makes it so that they're able to come in and say, okay, I've got the right to be able to publish this game in the future.
Not only that,
but
you get an inside look at what other people are willing to do. Yep.
Exactly. So
insider trading action there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very sneaky.
Yeah. So it's looking at that and being like, all right, it might say right of first refusal, but is this actually right of last match? And you as the dev might not know how to read the two and understand what is this actually saying. So
interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think the gist of this really is there's so much that having a lawyer can help with in terms of just one, experience. You know, you understand all the pitfalls and traps that we can walk into unknowingly and whatnot, but also, you know, the ability to read through stuff, or the ability to alter the contracts so that they're more fair, or I mean, I know you and I think I've talked to you more than any other, you know, I talk to you more than I talk to my accountant, that's for sure. Just because of all the different stuff that can come up. And then you have, you know, we haven't even gotten into, you know, when you're working with your own contractors or what you do with your music. I know the music agreement was something that you and I put a lot of work into to make sure it was fair to everybody and everybody owned what they needed to own and everybody's getting the right royalties and stuff. So I think it's dependent upon, I think the long part of it really is just, it depends on what your situation is. And that's where having a lawyer is going to help rather than something like LegalZoom, because everybody's situation is so complex, especially in the gaming industry. You know, so I think the summary is call Ben if you need help.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the episode, and thank you for being our first guest. If you want to share your business with everybody listening to this episode, to come to you for legal advice, please go ahead, like right now.
Yeah, so my Discord is right there on the video chat. Rainy, I assume that this is going to be
there.
Yeah,
published.
We've got video.
Yeah, so right below my name. Feel free to reach out to me here, or the URL is premackrogers.com. Premack is my last name. And then my co-founder, Dan Rogers, Rogers. So it's premackrogers.com.
Are you guys going to change it to include Downs? Or are you just going to leave it?
We're not going to change the website.
Okay.
We're going to update the logo and stuff like that. But yeah, we're not going to go through and change our email addresses and stuff.
They got
like
a new
that.
partner, and so it's been really cool to see everything kind of getting added to. If you don't know anything about partnerships and law firms, it's a big complicated thing. But what I did actually, real quick before we sign off, I wanted to do two things. One, there's more to what your law firm does than just indie developers. So can you talk about that real quick? Because I know like Noah specializes in a whole other area. So maybe somebody who's listening to our podcast needs a lawyer for something else and doesn't know that you guys do it. So what are some other things that you guys specialize in?
I work extensively in the video game industry.
Mm-hmm.
So indie developers, publishers, work for hire studios, porting studios, localization studios, stuff like that. That's what I spend most of my day working on. My partner Noah Downs, he's my lawyer friend on Twitter, and you can find him in a bunch of different places. That's literally his name is my lawyer friend.
Yeah, it's
my lawyer friend. Yeah, he's awesome. And he does a lot of the same work that I do, but also, but his real focus for the last decade has been representing streamers, influencers, people who are like Twitch partners, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. He is a Twitch partner, and getting involved in that side of the industry, and a lot more of kind of the marketing and commercialization aspects, and getting a game in front of people and their eyes on it.
And the contracts
so he does a lot
to
of
make
that.
Sure that the influencer is protected as well as the game developer. And I don't think that's something that people really realize exist. All the contracts that influencers have to deal with. I think people think that influencers just play games and that's that, but there's a lot more business behind the scenes that I don't think people know about.
I mean,
and that's what Noah kind of specializes in.
You gotta what's the word? Disclose if it's a sponsored video or if it's paid for or if it's a free thing. If they gave you a key, if you bought the key yourself, there's so much, especially in Europe, it's different. There's a very good video from Tom Scott about copyright infringement and having to be clear about your responses and stuff on YouTube and how it's
so that's the kind of stuff
proper.
that Noah handles?
Yeah, Noah handles a lot of that.
Cool.
And then he'll deal with a lot of things like, influencers, their name and likeness is very important to them. What they look like, what their character is. And so making sure that we're protecting that name and likeness, making sure that whoever they're doing business with isn't getting the right to go out and just use that name in the future, that we've got it very well defined. Okay, this influencer is coming in and doing X, Y, and Z for you. Anything that maybe this influencer creates during this particular campaign belongs to you, but you have no right to use their name for anything else. No right to go in and come in and say that they endorsed your game unless you've paid for that. And so, a lot of different ways to parse that sort of stuff. Like, do you have a right to their VOD after it's actually created?
Well, that's an intellectual property, right? Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Exactly. Or is it something where the influencer goes up and they post it, and they're going to link to you? They're going to, say, okay, here's who I'm, the game that I'm selling and the company that I'm working for, and doing all that paid disclosure stuff that Raina was just talking about.
Interesting.
But do you have the right to then go in and actually repost that VOD, or do you have the raw video image and you can recut it and put it into different marketing things, stuff like that? So
on your Steam
there's a
page,
lot of
stuff
different
like that,
components that come. Yeah, a lot of different components that come together into, putting together a successful influencer relationship.
Well,
Awesome. So
if you-
it sounds like you guys handle a lot of stuff in kind of that whole sphere. You guys don't do
Yeah, and then
movies or
let's
anything,
see.
do you?
We do. So we do
Okay.
television and movies. It's usually someone who is like, they've made a video game and then the game is getting optioned for for a movie or for a TV show. We pretty much always have some sort of conversation going on with Apple or Netflix or Amazon or something of that sort.
Yeah. Streaming services.
Aside from conversations that we're having with Twitter or with Twitch.
Right.
And we deal with in addition to that, we work with a lot of, if it's interactive entertainment or touches on interactive entertainment, we deal with it. So there's been a lot after the pandemic, there's been a lot of resurgence in the board game and tabletop industry.
Right.
And so we've been working a lot with tabletop publishers and developers and virtual table creators.
Right.
So like,
yeah.
Nice.
that's been a lot of fun. We handle
So
a
you
lot of
guys are
different
well
things.
versed and prepared to help with anything in the entertainment.
Yeah, I mean,
industry,
if you're not
right?
convinced, how many lawyers can you find that you can just go to Discord and message them? I mean, it's that easy. Just
Easily the coolest lawyer I've ever worked with.
But yeah, it's been incredible having you on this episode. Is there anything you wanted to add, Sid?
I kind of wanted to just see if Ben had any fun short stories.
I was gonna
he
say
wanted to
that.
share.
Yeah, if you want to.
Do you have any anecdotes you want to? Something fun that happened recently.
Putting Ben on the
something
spot.
goofy, or something that you just couldn't believe that you had to work with or deal with, or some weird things you've had to do for me.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I mean, do you mind if we talk about the licenses we've been working on for RainyGames or for SunnySide?
Yeah.
That's been a lot of fun, and I've never had to deal with that
for
particular
SunnySide
question
as well,
before.
Especially.
Yeah, we haven't officially announced.
Those dolls were so creepy.
That's the best story.
Actually, yeah, let's talk
invented.
about the dolls. Let's talk about the dolls, because the other thing we haven't announced yet. So nobody actually knows that it's in the game. So I don't want to.
And I hope we're not upsetting anybody, because those dolls were discontinued back in
They
the
were
80s,
horrible.
thank God. But
We'll have to find a picture, Rainy, and somehow put it on here.
Let me just see if I can find it.
But yeah, so
That was
I'll
so
kind
creepy.
of. So when
Yeah,
we
lead
were
us in.
going through creating the trademarks, copyrights. I can never remember the difference between the two of them. Trademarks, copyrights.
Trademark is the brand.
Right.
So SunnySide is the brand. Copyright is the creative work.
Got it. Okay, so when we were doing all that, essentially when you put in to get a trademark or copyright on anything, you have to go through a very big legal process that honestly you have to have a lawyer for. Don't try to do this on your own. It is not worth it. And you have to submit a bunch of paperwork and whatever. talking about kind of what your brand is, what you're making, what you're representing. And you put it out there publicly. And then if anybody thinks that you're infringing on something they've already done, they have the right to contest your application. And so when we put in for SunnySide, we had somebody contest the SunnySide application. And
It
normally
wasn't even a contest. It was the examining attorney.
yeah, it's even worse.
Does that
Yeah,
mean the
so-
examining
the
attorney
USPTO.
knew about this or found out about this and decided
They
to bring
found
it
it, I guess.
So
And
they've got an
thought,
internal
hey, this
database
might be
that
a
they
problem.
search.
So he wasn't even the
Yeah.
creator of the
Oh,
that got in contact. Okay.
no. So we had, normally it's something that's kind of in your area. So if, they'd found another video game that was something similarly titled or something, they could have, hey, this is a thing you don't have to worry about. But the thing that they sent us was so ridiculous. It was dolls. Like physical,
Yeah.
like Cabbage Patch Kid looking dolls called
Very scary
SunnySide
ones. And Friends?
Friends.
Or
I think?
SunnySide Friends. Yeah, I think so.
Something like that.
That was it.
And some of
Sunnyside
them,
Friends.
some
You
of
can
them
find it
were
if you
relatively
Google it.
normal, but there were a couple that were just like horrifying.
Mm.
And
Definitely a product of its time.
they sent us pictures of like the broken packaging. And it just,
Oh
like,
yeah, and I was
it
like,
looked
oh no, it
something out of
broke
a horror
out.
movie.
Put it back in.
But
It was scary, yeah.
we'll see if we
that
can
was
attach
so good.
pictures to this.
If anybody grew
somehow.
up with the dolls, I'm sorry, but like, you might need
Yeah.
some
Here.
you might
Therapy?
need some therapy. Yeah. It was. They were very scary.
Oh,
Yeah.
God, you're so creepy.
Yeah. Google SunnySide
Oh.
Friends doll or something, and you'll find it.
Oh, man.
I'm not even sure it would come up, to be honest. They're
Yeah. I'll
not
try
a
to see if I
common
can
Is
put
there
thing
a
that
it.
I've
way-
ever heard of.
Yeah, if I share my screen, would it just override my video?
No,
No.
I'll have to put it back.
Or-
I'll put it. I'll have
Yeah.
to put it in post. It's alright.
We'll just put it over
Okay.
your face in post, and people
Will
can
do.
see these horrifying dolls that we had to contend
Yeah.
with. But yeah, there's definitely some interesting stuff that can come up when you're trying to get your stuff all. And do you think it's worth it for video games to go through that hassle of getting the copyrights and the trademarks and?
Copyright, absolutely.
Mm.
Copyright is relatively simple and straightforward, relatively inexpensive. And the registration just opens up so many benefits that aren't available if you are unregistered. Because copyright is created as soon as you publish that game. But a lot of the statutory ability to go after statutory damages, recover your attorney fees, stuff like that, you can't do if you're not registered.
Mm.
So it's very worth registering the copyright. Trademarks, it all depends on how unique your name is and how much you care about it. It's something where in an optimal world, everyone would trademark what they're creating. Because
expensive.
you never know. Yeah, well, I mean, you also never know exactly what's going to be successful. Like,
Yeah.
Imagine if Nintendo hadn't protected the name Mario.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Or
I
Super
think
Mario
the-
Brothers. Yeah.
I think the thing that is really interesting is like when companies trademark colors. Like this is our Coca-Cola red.
Well, like
Or
Pantone
the-
as a
the-
company, you're calling them out right now.
Well, actually, no, I'm calling out my local university. So the University of Texas has trademarked the specific color of orange that they use to represent their university. It is
You mean
UT
burnt umber?
orange. Yeah, burnt umber, and nobody else is allowed to use it. That I always thought was really interesting. So there's,
Yeah.
I think Tiffany blue is also trademarked. There's a lot of colors that companies
That's like
and
the
brands
company
use
Sky
that
in
have
the
been
UK.
trademarked.
Trademarking the word
Yeah.
sky.
Yeah, well,
Well, it
white
becomes so
chocolate is
important
another
where-
interesting one that's trademarked.
Yeah, and it becomes so important because, you're creating this commercial good, and let's say you've put, you guys, I don't want to disclose information that I know, so I'm going to ask you a question, and then you're allowed
Sure,
to disclose
yeah,
it or not. How much have you guys spent on developing SunnySide?
Oh right.
So the Kickstarter itself The Kickstarter was about 30,000. The backer kit was about another 30,000, and almost all of that I have publicly stated went towards the music. So that's kind of how I give people an idea of how much money we spent overall. I don't usually disclose it because I don't know what merge is okay with me disclosing.
I think we can say that it's much more than how much we made.
And I have also stated publicly that just having the seasonal outfits for all the characters cost us about $30,000. So
I mean, you
take all
the
these
size of the game is out
together
there. Put porting in there, put localization in there, put QA in there, put 3 years of development in there, marketing in there, and then you get a pretty good number, probably, figure of how much SunnySide costs.
Exactly. So you look at it and you say, okay, let's say it was a $2 million game to develop. And, that's a pretty standard number at this point for just making a fully complete game. Yeah. You go through and you want your name on that game to be protected.
Right.
Because otherwise, let's say you're putting out a game named SunnySide, and then a week later someone else comes out and puts out a game named SunnySide. And all of a sudden it's making it harder to find you on Google. There's some confusion.
And I mean, you can put considerable
Steam.
amount of your life on something. Like games look at Manor Lords, right? That game took about 10 years to be made. It was a solo dev. He worked with a lot of contractors and outsourced a bunch of stuff, but he still spent a considerable portion of his life working on this game. You absolutely don't want to lose that, because at that point it's a matter of like, what legacy do I have in my name? Yeah. And that is a considerable amount of time. Yeah.
I mean, he spent 5 years on Stardew Valley, and then another 6-8 years after it was released, and he's still working on it. And look at all the stuff. I mean, I think honestly he's a really great example of why you need to protect yourself at the beginning.
You never know,
because there's no way that he knew that game was going to kickstart the indie revolution. It was going to rejuvenate the whole farm sim genre. It was gonna become a milestone and a starting point for so many parts of the industry. Had he not done what he did to protect it,
you can use Undertale. You can use Five Nights at Freddy's. All of these games that were just like tiny little indie games, and they just blow up. And you
never know.
And so you look at it and you say, okay, it's really expensive to go trademark a name. It's going to cost you probably a minimum of $2,000, and budget up to like $20,000 to deal with wrinkles that come along. As you're going through the whole process. But if you spent 10 years of your life and a couple $1 million or a couple $1 million equivalent of salary that you could have earned,
that's it.
It's and then if the game is successful, you don't want someone coming in and using the exact same name and diluting your brand. So it's worth it. Is it necessary for everyone, to kind of tie it back to your original question, Sid? Is it necessary for everyone? No. But it is a good idea for everyone.
There's a point where you should definitely consider it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Well,
I think we'll.
This has been awesome.
Yeah, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you again for being our first guest, and thank you for listening to us and making us, as I like to steal from Metal Link, part of your daily routine or weekly routine, I hope. And we do have a Patreon if you would like to support episodes. We do not do an extended version on episodes on How to Indie because we'd like it to be accessible to everybody. But the episodes that we do every other week, there's an extended version that you can check on our Patreon down below. Every money that you spent on there goes through development of whatever game we're working on, and currently that is SunnySide, which you can check on Steam. We also have a Discord. Make sure to join it, especially if you backed us on Patreon. These episodes go early on Patreon as well. We publish them on Mondays, and we publish them on the Thursday of the same week when he goes public. But yeah, that's been the 16th episode of the Developers Podcast. Thank you for listening to us, and we will see you next week where we talk about everything that's happening in the indie.
Before we sign off,
yeah.
Before you guys sign off, do you want to? You guys have a pretty big event coming up here in the next month with
Good
SunnySide.
point. Although when this
It's
episode
probably
goes
worth
up,
mentioning.
when this episode goes up, I don't know if the event will probably be happening, like it's already happened at that point, right, Sid?
Well, we might be talking about different events. I think Ben's just talking about release.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ben's just talking about the fact that our game's
Yeah,
coming out, so
yeah.
he wants to make sure you don't forget to talk about
Yeah,
it.
SunnySide is coming out on 14th of June. We gave ourselves an extra 3 weeks because you all played the demo
needed
way
it.
too much and gave us way too much feedback, which we are super thankful for. So yeah, we're taking another 3 weeks to polish things, add a lot of quality of life stuff, fix bugs that came up during the playtest sessions and the demo period. So thank you for that, for the 3 weeks, and I hope that we can deliver a much more complete package on the
June
14th. June 14th.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then the one
Mark
that
your
you're thinking of,
calendars.
Rainy, that I think Ben
I thought we were
knows
talking
is
about
we're gonna be
DreamHack.
we're gonna be at DreamHack in Dallas. I'll be at DreamHack in Dallas.
Oh, cool.
So actually, when this episode comes out, it'll be this weekend. So yeah, this episode comes out on the 20 on the 30th, and then I'll be in Dallas on the 31st. So
Mhm.
if you're in the Dallas area and you want to come say hi and come check out SunnySide, and our booth will be in the Indie Playground at DreamHack in Dallas, and I'm super excited about it. Epic Gardening, who has partnered with us, has sent us a bunch of stuff that we're gonna show off and give away, and so we've been scrambling to try to like get everything together and stuff, but it's pretty cool. I'm really excited about it.
That'll be
So,
fun.
if you're in
So
Dallas,
yeah, if
Come
you're in
say hi.
Dallas, go check out on Friday this week, right?
tomorrow
and-
it'll be tomorrow. Yeah,
Tomorrow, when the public one goes
Yeah.
up, yeah.
yeah.
And yeah, game comes out on 14th of June, and if you would like to check it out for yourself, there's a free demo up on Steam. Go check it out. We'll see you all next week where we talk about every news thing in the industry.
All the news things.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Thanks, Ben.
All right. Yep. See you guys later.